Um, I had indicated at that time that I wanted to ask you, Mr. Lewis and Ms. Holder and Ms. Nichols, your views on a few things. I'm going to invite the Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel to share with me some sections, or share with us some sections of the Markets and Slaughterhouse Regulations, 1958. You can begin, Madam Deputy, at at section 4 of those regulations. And we could just go through, I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 possibly areas that we need to look at.
Chair, thank you very much. Just to preface my remarks on the regulations on the fact that when the consequential amendments were done, they were done with the view of trying to take out the criminalizing of the selling with in terms of the licensing regime. But from doing research on expungement, and also in hearing some of the experiences coming out of the contribution from Barvin, I recognize that the approach in terms of decriminalizing has to go farther than dealing with just the licensing regime and the fact that you want to take out the criminalization there, but it also has to stretch to other ways in which vendors are regulated. To this end, that got me to examining the Markets and Slaughterhouses regulations, and in particular how the public markets would then be run. So there are some provisions that are that have criminal offenses that perhaps need to be examined again so that they can perhaps carry an administrative penalty rather than a criminal penalty. So, for example, in Regulation 4 of the Markets and Slaughterhouses regulations, you have a provision which states that if any person in a public market refuses or neglects to comply with the direction of the chief supervisor in relation to the maintenance of order or regularity in the public market, that person shall be guilty of an offense and liable to a fine of not exceeding $25. So in that instance, perhaps you might want to intervene there to make it subject to an administrative penalty, and you would add it then to the administrative penalty regime that is in the bill. Another instance would be Regulation 6, which speaks to the days and opening hours of public markets. Again, the chief supervisor then deals with that, and that is also subject to a penalty, a criminal penalty. In relation to regulation.
Can I ask you to pause there?
Yes, please.
Is there a corresponding piece of legislation for the fisheries division management? Sorry? Oh, you're guided by them? Okay, fine. Proceed, sorry about that.
Yes, Chair. So in relation, remember, to fish markets are public markets too, right? So they would be under the same regime. The Regulation 7 deals with the ringing of the bell each half an hour to deal with the carrying of live animals and commodities, and that is subject to a criminal offense. There's also the removal of marketable commodities within the stands and spaces of the market. That is also subject to a criminal penalty, and that is in Regulation 10. Regulation 18, which is the one that we read earlier, dealing with certain behaviors like cursing and urinating and depositing refuse and that kind of behavior, that is subject to a criminal offense. And then Regulation 34 speaks to not exposing or selling a commodity except where you're dealing with a stall rented or occupied and paid for with the rent, or except in a market stall rented or occupied by him, and that is subject to a criminal penalty. So what I was proposing is that those particular regulations, then what you would do is in the consequential amendments, you would go in and amend the markets and slaughterhouse regulations, those specific regulations, and have them be subject to administrative penalties. And then those same provisions would be added to the 7th schedule, not the 7th schedule, the 7th schedule, or the schedule dealing with admin penalties,
yes,
so that all
right.
of it would be represented. But that's my proposal.
Fine. I thank you, Chief. Can I just ask a question with regard to Clause 9? For some reason, Clause 9 of those regulations, 9, is there 9A7?
Right, so Regulation 9A talks about the control of fishing boats.
Oh,
yes, so that is a $1,000 criminal penalty and 6 months for a term of imprisonment. But I don't think that we would intervene to deal with that specifically. That has to be regulated differently from the provisions that I spoke to before.
Okay. Okay, so colleagues, let's make this simple. Let me just put it this way. What the Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel is suggesting is that there are a number of areas which create criminal penalties within this body of regulations, and she's identified them and is suggesting that we lift them out for the purposes of them being treated as you go forward as areas which would attract administrative penalties instead of being criminally, or instead of attracting criminal sanction. Mr. Lewis, you are in the business of managing the markets. Does this seem to make sense to you, sir?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense, sir. On the whole, though, I believe that this Markets and Slaughterhouse Act and Regulations 1958, it needs a thorough going through and being made more applicable to the times that we live in right now.
I think that the Minister of Agriculture who's here may wish to speak to that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we have already agreed that there must be an amendment to the Markets and Slaughterhouses Act because of this very statute that we're currently discussing. So it would be nice to do a parallel so that the two can be finalized together, because what it basically speaks to is how we take out that which was in the Markets and Slaughterhouses Act to put into this vending bill, and then amend what is left to make it relevant for this 21st century requirement.
Fair enough. Thank you, Minister. Ms. Holder, do you have anything that you wish to add to that?
No, sir.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Ms. Nichols, I know you're not in the business of managing the markets, but you may have a perspective on it.
Yes, sir. I am in agreement with it being decriminalized because, given that we have the manager, some of those things can be dealt at that managerial level, and hope to bring some cohesion among the officers of the markets and the fisher folks.
Okay. Not directly related to anything arising out of the legislation, but I just want to get a feel for how difficult some of this is in practice, because in this environment here, we are dealing with a largely artificial type of environment. The reality on the ground in the market is a slightly different thing. Do you foresee any challenges from what you've been hearing and seeing so far, Mr. Lewis?
I'm not in the true sense. I have a question here, though, in terms of seeking some clarity. Part 3, regulations of vending activities, clause 2. It's page 13 on my page.
Part 3, regulation of vending activities. What page are you on?
I'll be on page 13. I think that you
Right,
might be a
yes.
page ahead of me or behind me for some reason. But it says the minister, on consultation with the minister responsible for public markets and minister for fisheries, grant a license to an applicant referred to in subsection 1 within 7 days of receipt of application. I was just trying to find out, though, in terms of seeking some clarity, if some person wants to vend in a fish market, the first person of contact is the minister in charge of commerce, as opposed to the minister or the manager, so senior manager of markets.
That is, in fact, accurate. Now, I will defer to the Chief Parliamentary Counsel to explain the thing to you, but loosely speaking, it is intended that commerce will be the repository of all of the register of vendors in Barbados.
Right.
It is intended that there's a lovely term that the Chief Parliamentary Counsel uses that I'm very attracted to. What is the principle, ma'am? That principle which says that not just the minister but his staff. The Carlton Principle, yes. That the Carlton Principle applies. And the Carlton Principle is that you would be referring to the minister, but it isn't the minister, the individual.
Yeah, you understand that
right.
part.
And so therefore, what has to happen is that the application is made to commerce. It is for staff by me, then to liaise, and no doubt this can be done electronically with you all. And you ascertain those things that only you know about, whether you got any markets that have space, and if it has space, how much space it has, how soon you can accommodate a vendor in the Bridgetown market, for example, if at all. And then having gone through those exercises, then the license is issued by the minister responsible or the ministry responsible for commerce.
It seems a little lengthy.
It does.
Because in my way of thinking, I think that we could, in my way of thinking, I think if some person wants to sell, we say, at Bridgetown Public Market, that person should approach the management of Bridgetown Public Market to find out if they could vend in Bridgetown Market, rather than go to the Ministry of Commerce, fill out a form, for that form to be sent to us, then for us to say no. I think that we should be able to say no even before the form goes to Commerce.
Well, I can only say to you that the challenge we have had, sir, is the challenge of trying to correct some of the difficulties that arose for several decades in Barbados, where the ministry that you are part of has its own regulatory structure. The ministry that I have the honor to lead has its own structure, and quite frankly, has never had any formal relationship with the vending community, which is another tragedy because, earlier this year, for example, when we had to have the national pause, as it was described, we then were forced to try to find out who were the legitimate vendors in Barbados so that we could offer them assistance. Because we really had no register anywhere to be found that could give us all that we wanted to get by way of information. Now, equally, we have to treat to the ministry responsible for agriculture because they have their own markets and their own formal structure. And as if that were not more difficult enough, we then had to bring on board the National Conservation Commission, who deal with vending on the beaches and on the esplanades and in the parks and gardens around the country, and they have their own statutory arrangements and their own established structure. So that while I take your point, the real difficulty has been, without dismantling all that had existed before, how we could try to pull them together with a view to making this work. Perfection was in danger of becoming the enemy of the good. And so that's why we settled on this approach.
I just think it's a bit.
But I take your point.
The process could be a bit lengthy, though.
I take your point. And I would want.
I mean, but even have a situation where something might slip through the loop and put us in a little bit of trouble. In that you might get, let me say, for instance, you get 200 applications for people to vend at Bridgetown. And then you send them back to us, you might only send back 199. And for some reason, one fellow is given permission to vend at Bridgetown Public Market, unknown to us, and then he comes down there to vend. I mean, I'm just thinking things that can happen. As opposed to us saying from day one, when these 200 people come, we do not have any room here, so it makes no sense in going to the Ministry of Commerce in the first place.
I'm Minister Weir.
Chair, thank you. I've heard the the manager of markets on this matter. I've heard the minister with responsibility for maritime affairs and the economy on it. And I'm now hearing the officer in charge of markets for maritime affairs and blue economy. And they are all on all fours where this matter is concerned. And it seems to me that in order for us to avoid the elongated process of issuing a license, it might be wise to consider what the people who have a day-to-day understanding of how the system works, and that the process should be that the recommendation for the license should come straight from the relevant ministry to the Ministry of Commerce and reduce the elongated process of having to apply for a license, because that is what the people with the experience is telling us.
Minister, may I, Chair?
Minister Humphrey.
Sir, you and I spoke on this matter. You know how I feel. I share the same sentiment. I think the mischief that we were trying to fix and to remedy here, you know, we may end up just making it more so. And the last time I spoke on the matter, I said I cannot think of an instance where we added more bureaucracy and became more efficient. And my thing is that I take the point that we need to have that register, and that you will still have the register if the persons come to the relevant ministries, the information is taken there, and the information then sent on to the Ministry of Commerce, so that which you're seeking to achieve, you still achieve, without causing the unintended negative consequences of complicating matters in terms of the administration of the markets. And I must tell you, sir, and in all honesty, I did not advise Mr. Lewis on this matter. His sentiments are entirely his, but they happen also to be mine. And I think that is born simply from our experience and our involvement intimately in the sector as it stands.
I thank you, Minister, for your comments. Deputy Chief, is there anything that you might wish to add at this stage?
Chair, so when the office was given, this is CPC, the office was given the initial instructions, it was really on the conceit that the ministry responsible for commerce would then be taking over all of the, at least, licensing regime, right? But the operations of the management of the operations of the markets, etc., on the ground would remain with the relevant functionaries. So that was the conceit. But then it began to evolve that each one wanted a say, so that in order to facilitate the say, the unhappy clause 5.2 was reached. So the thing is that came out of a lot of discussion, and I understand that it is not something that everybody wanted, but it was the best that we could come up with at the time. So the only thing that I can think of is probably to suggest that you have some other functionary that could feed the three. NCC would continue under the present regime to regulate. Their part seems to be fine. But those where you're not dealing with the parts, esplanades, etc., perhaps you need like a functionary then that will feed all three, and that way streamline everything. Thank you.
But given the current structure, that functionary would then be still the Ministry of Commerce, because the Ministry of Commerce, effectively what we're saying is that an application is made, submitted, and the fact of the application communicated to the relevant department. Correct?
Yes, Chair. So what would happen is they would make the application to the minister responsible for commerce, and then in the making of the decision to grant the license, he was required to consult with the minister responsible for public markets and the minister responsible for fisheries in the granting of the license. In the initial discussions in the context of the committee, the understanding was that administratively you would come to a harmony, because the bill is not supposed to come into operation right away, and so with that delayed in the commencement, in that time you would put in the necessary administrative framework to allow all three to work together. That was my understanding.
Is it envisaged, Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel, that the form of application set out in the first schedule of the bill can be filled out electronically and submitted electronically?
Chair, those were not things that were discussed. It is not that, I don't think anything stops it from being submitted electronically. And in any case, if it is that the forms need to be calibrated to deal with an electronic format, space is given in the Interpretation Act to make the necessary modifications once you are not adjusting the substance.
Okay. So, Mr. Lewis, I want to take your submission on board as best as possible without doing violence to the work already done. And I'm wondering whether perhaps our challenge here is that we are thinking in the mindset of the 19th and 20th century. If electronic submission can be done, which is not a difficult thing, many people can do an email in Barbados. Most people can, most people do. Sometimes you don't even have to have a computer, you go on your phone in your hand. You fill out the form and you submit it. The form really and truly then is almost instantaneously where it needs to be, because it can be so structured that it goes directly, if it is an application for fisheries, it goes straight to the relevant people in fisheries and at commerce at the same time. I would think that the point the Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel is making is that this bill makes provision for us to have a period of time after it passes Parliament to put the necessary administrative arrangements in place to give purpose to this as a living document. Regulations have to be made pursuant to Clause 34, and then the bill comes into operation on a date fixed by proclamation. Now, we could set that date to be a time when we have put all of the necessary arrangements in place. I can tell you another one that off the top of my head must be put in place, because you have to have, for example, appropriate cold storage facilities so that things that are taken up, like fruits and stuff like that, if a vendor has, for whatever reason, to have his produce relocated to another location, and he's not doing it himself, then the state has to take responsibility for it, but can't afford for it to be damaged. So it must be kept at appropriate temperatures and then submitted back to the vendor again. These are things that are going to take us a little bit of time after the passage of this act. So my question to you really is, do you think that if we use electronic technology readily available to us now, we can solve the problem that you're addressing?
Yeah, I think to some extent, but we also have to understand that we are still living in a day and age where many of the fisher folk are not, for want of a better phrase, computer literate, and you might have to rely on other persons to deal with that. My main concern, though, was the long process and the errors that could happen because of the lengthy process.
Okay. It's something that we will have to reflect on, but I thank you.
I
Minister
would like
Weir.
to speak to that.
I recall that this matter came up when we first sat to discuss this statute, and the manager of markets identified the time frames through which a license must or should be granted, given the perishability of certain items. And so therefore, the fact that the officer in charge of fish markets is now pointing out that this is something that will take some nimbleness. We may very well want to reconsider how this is captured, because the reality of it is that either we're going to set some time frames for which a license is issued, or we're going to have to revisit this thing, this section of the act, to make sure that a person with perishable items isn't left with spoilage.
No,
I think that was borne out. So if my memory serves me correctly, the manager of markets was supposed to come back with some recommended time frames.
Yes.
Yes,
Deputy Chief.
sorry. Thank you, Minister Weir, for raising that, because as these discussions go along, I make amendments in relation to drafts. So the committee would have received 2 instances of amendments arising out of meetings that we've had. And in the first iteration, I made the amendment to clause 5.2 to say that the license process is supposed to be completed within 7 days. And that was one of the timelines that was identified in the discussion.
Right. And at 5.2, that provision for 7 days is there. And I think that, in my own judgment, that is really in every sense of the word, an outer limit. I go back to the fact that potentially we can use electronic platforms. And I want us to think about life, not as we necessarily see it now, but as it needs to be as we go forward. I hear what you're saying, Mr. Lewis, about there being not a universal ability to use the technology, but in a real sense, that's what friends, family, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife is for, children, etc., to help those who cannot adequately do it. The point is, we have an ability for that 7-day period to realistically become 7 hours. If we're being very practical about this thing, consultation in the context of what the law requires means that the manager markets Ms. Lewis, what is your title again? The
Senior manager.
senior
of
manager,
markets.
and who would be the person in commerce? It would be you. Yeah. So you're a friend from Black Rock, Mr. Lewis.
Listen, come back.
Yes, you're a friend from Black Rock. Yourself and Mr. Sherlock King are the three people who would need to interface with one another. Can't be that hard. Or officers designated by you all. But again, we're really talking about an email arriving on your desk simultaneously as it arrives on Mr. Cumberbatch's desk and Mr. King's desk. If you're talking about a market, that's not a fish market. And it being processed. I don't know that this need become a major issue. It is, in other words, it's no longer, you're not envisaging as we would have had to have done when I first went into government in 2003, a motor car and a driver come and collect a file and carry that file across to the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Blue Economy, and then leave from there and go up to the Ministry of Agriculture, up by Graham Hall, and then come back down the road or come back for another day or whatever. This is something now that can be done by moving a mouse and pressing a button.
Minister, Chair, I've heard you, and I don't think we need to belabor the point. We will, in faith, hope that the system so espoused and envisioned is able to deliver that which it says it will do. I'm looking at Mr. Cumberbatch. And that we are able to move expeditiously through the matter. So I would advise the senior manager, though I understand his reservations, that we will accept it and move on.
Agreed, Minister. Quick question, though.
Possible for me to speak on this, please?
Sorry, who was that? I heard a voice. I wasn't sure.
I was overlapping.
I beg your pardon, ma'am.
I will let her speak.
Yes, please, Ms. Nichols.
Thank you. Right, so I'm listening to the discussion on this whole matter of licensing and the vendors, and Mr. Lewis brought one of the things that I wanted to say to your attention regarding electronic applications and stuff, and I understand that they need to be moving forward in the digital world as it is today. And this is one of the areas that we are right now working with our fisher folk in terms of training and using digital tools to move forward and develop the industry. From listening to the conversation, I'm not certain what I'm missing, but I'm still having a difficulty understanding some of the rhetoric or discussions regarding what it is that y'all are talking about in terms of getting this whole thing pulled together through the different ministries. Just to say that I hope that at the end we don't have a cumbersome, situation where we have, a vendor fisher folk unable to manage the system, so that thought be given to the fact that we have persons who are still challenged and needs to, better understand how to get these things done. Also, I would like to find out is, in terms of applications, is it going to be a first in, first come basis in terms of applications or getting applications in? And then secondly, when persons want to apply for these it's license, when persons want to apply for these license. So the fisheries division that we used to work with in the past, where we would have to take our health certificates after being signed by the manager markets. So that is going to be out completely now. We are not going through that process at all. Because I think that what's missing here is that we are not discussing, I know that we are going forward, but we are not discussing some of the old systems that we used to do to move forward the changes that, will be coming in terms of accessing this license as we used to do in the past, from fisheries to... So Mr. Lewis is saying everything is going to be done at Commerce.
Chair?
Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel is going to speak to this point, ma'am.
Yes, so not everything has been, can you hear me? Not everything it will be abandoned, so you will recognize that there are certain documents that you need to submit in order to facilitate the granting of the license. So you will still need to, if you are a food vendor, for instance, you're still required to submit the certificate of good health from a registered medical practitioner, and you'll still need to get the license to carry on a food business granted pursuant to the health services food hygiene regulations. So there's still, those requirements have been retained. You also have to remember that if you are operating then within the public market specifically, that you will still have to adhere to those regimes as well. So I just wanted to point that out. Thanks.
Thank you. Something I had written here from the time it came was about the age limit, and this is more specific to my minister. I brought it up with Mr. Lewis, but I would have wanted to bring it up in this forum. So we have situations where, from time to time, some of the vendors, they have their school-living children, 15. I know that the age limit is 16 for persons being able to come into the market or do the vending. But these persons are thinking that rather than leaving their children home to either get in trouble or do anything, they will want to bring them into the market and allow them to work with them. They're not necessarily vending, but they're assisting maybe in cleaning fish, cleaning the parents' boxes and stuff like that. And to allow for them also to learn, because we're also talking about the development of the fishing industry and bringing younger people into the fishing industry. So while I know that there are laws to govern the way that things are done, we would also want to, to see that avenue is given to these persons who would be interested in coming into the industry, even at that level. So I want to know if there's a place, I don't know if it's in the bill or even just the manager markets or the minister looking at how we can accommodate those persons that will want to help their children. Thank you.
At this point, ma'am, the only thing that I could say to you with respect to what the legislation is contemplating is that we're thinking that the age at which you can legally be doing the business of vending would be brought down to 16 as opposed to 18 where it is now. There are some challenges. I want to tell you that up front. Among them is an existing piece of legislation which says that at 16 you are considered to be too young to contract commercially. And obviously vending at its core is a business, and you are talking about commercial contracts. But I hear what you're saying, and it is a point upon which we will have to reflect. I having said 16 though, you've carried us a little bit further down the road to 15. And I must tell you equally honestly that we had not given any contemplation, any consideration at all to that age. But help me a little bit to help you. How many so would you be talking about? From your experience, what numbers of 15-year-olds find themselves in those circumstances?
They're not many. From time to time, you would find that I don't even think we have, to my mind at this time, where we have 10 persons who have come in. But I know of 1 or 2 persons who you would usually bring, and this is a family. The grandchildren and the children were brought into the fishing industry by the mother, who is also a young person, and seen that family grow as a Fisher Fort family. But what I'm saying is not just about her, but for other persons who might want to do it. But in honesty, there are not a lot of them that I'm talking about. I'm just asking about the provision for that to happen. Right now, we have some younger people coming into the industry, which is good. And for those who really don't know and see, this fishing industry has the persons in this industry now is really aging out, and we don't even see a large amount of younger persons who we can say will be carrying on the baton for this industry unless things change in maybe the next 10 years. So, and you know, even for guys who want to go fishing, the fishermen in the industry is also aging out, and there's not this big gap. Young people who's also going fishing, and I think that the system has to look at a way to accommodate them. I understand the laws regarding labor and those kind of things, but if we want to speak to the development of a fishing industry, we also have to see how best we can harness these young people who is interested in being a part of the fishing industry, whether through their parents, and you know, get them on board now.
You know, Ms. Nichols, you are touching a very important chord, and I wonder whether the solution really is not to treat to those children who are no longer in school at 15 by way of finding an avenue for them to be trained. And if the training is going to take them into fishing, then so be it. But I think that what we would be best advised to try to do is to steer them in the direction of developing skills, especially life skills. We have present here a former minister responsible for youth affairs, and I'm going to ask him to share his thoughts on the matter. Minister Ford?
Thanks, Chair. My simple thoughts on the matter are entrained in the fact that through the eons of time, persons in Barbados, like other countries, would allow, by the simple traditions, would allow their offspring to accompany them while they are executing their various vocations. Fishing is one of them. You will find that a carpenter may have a son, and on weekends, he may venture to go with his daddy and either hold the wood and was his kneeling, and that has been part of the Bajan way of life and the Caribbean way of life. We have done it as Christian Barbadians, Muslims do it. Every single religion has their own way and their own industry, and they have allowed their children throughout the years to be part of that industry. It's a way of passing on the baton. What I would say is that from a legal perspective, as it relates to entering into agreements and contracts and payment, I would say, Chair, for us to respect the tenets of the law, that when it comes to payments and the structural system, I suspect that you will have to start those payments after school leaving age, which is after 16 years, where you can enter those legal arrangements for payment. But I don't think you can stop something that has been going on all the time, and it is tradition, and it is giving persons, families, and youngsters in the neighborhood on weekends, as I said, and to have that experience. I don't think that that's something that we could put a stop to in one fell swoop. That's my opinion on it.
Just a reply to the Minister. I am not talking about children or allowing children to leave school or come out of school and do this work. I'm mostly talking, and I respect what Minister Ford is saying, and I understand it fully, but it was more speaking to children like who are on holidays, like we have Easter and Christmas and those times when the children have those breaks to come out. It doesn't have to be a legal transition, but just saying allowing them to come. as,
I understand you, and you're saying that right now that is not permissible, that you can't, say for example, the same way I may have chosen to take my little son to work and see a little bit, but what I do, you can't take your son to the market?
what I'm saying is that even though in some cases maybe at Bridgetown where children are allowed to do it, for the purposes of the discussions we are having here in terms of the bill and all of these things, that I would want it noted that this is what is allowed, so that when persons decide that they want to do it, then there is not an objection.
I take your point. I take your point.
Chair, probably Deputy CPC can help us in this, because I don't think this is any dissimilar from what happens and it doesn't run foreign to what happens in the different sectors, I think, and the supermarkets, for instance. I remember I was a checkout boy, if you call it that, at 14 years old in the supermarket.
Me too.
And that was during my vacation times. It was not allowed during school, the weekdays, but certainly on Saturdays and Sunday. So I don't know what is the practice, if it is legal or whatever, but it has not been something that is foreign to this country in the way how we operate. So the Deputy CPC will probably be able to advise on it.
So, Chair, as I said, in drawing the committee's attention to the matter, this is something that exists in the law, and so to my mind it needed to be addressed. Either it is that you would have to create a kind of exception, but with the Minors Act hovering, where it would say that if it is that there is a problem, the contract would then be voidable, or you deal with the age in relation to what is understood by a minor, and we may fall afoul of international agreements there. But then the other thing is simply to deal with just putting the age at which you can get the license at 18, but perhaps there may be a mechanism that we can put in place to create a kind of training or apprenticeship kind of program. This could probably be done via regulations, so that you can find a scheme for them to be trained, but also perhaps then to receive remuneration rather than salary on a technical point. Do you understand where I'm coming from, Chair?
I do.
Thank you.
I do. I think that the bottom line is, Ms. Nichols, that you have made an important observation, and this is something that may actually go outside the scope of this bill, but it is worthy of some consideration, because I think we really want to be encouraging our young people, and as you said, if it is in summer, Easter vacation and that type of thing, there's really no reason why we should not be encouraging them to be exposed and to learn and to yearn for an opportunity to participate. Like Minister Ford, I had the same type of experience. I had to go and pack some bags in the supermarket and thing. That's correct, and get some good tips too. But I'm not sure that we can accommodate it within this legislation, but it is worth looking at more broadly. Are there any other requests? I think Minister Cummins, you had wanted the floor at one point.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've come to the conclusion that I would have recommended in any event. Thank you to the Deputy CPC and your guidance. But I think the broader question, Chairman, is that there are a number of recommendations that have been made by sectoral representatives and by presenters to this committee that I think are worthy of noting, even though they fall outside of the scope of the provisions of this bill. So, for example, the role to be played in a developmental way for youth. It is not just about children coming or youth coming during the summer holidays or in their holidays, whichever ones they may be, and being a part of what their families are doing. Even in international trade law, for international intellectual property, you're talking about passing on ancestral knowledge, and that is a tradable commodity that I think we have a responsibility to harness by way of ancillary policy supporting this legislation. Earlier in the session this morning, there was another recommendation which I believe you, Chair, may have inadvertently helped to spawn, which spoke about in African countries where you have large markets and multiple people selling much of the same thing, and how that was then created. In my mind, it created an opportunity for us to treat to the question of cooperative buying and distribution and the distributive and the wholesale trading, and how we can help to take our traders and our vendors into more corporate forms of business from where they start, and how we can support that evolution through the development of policy. And so I think, Chairman, that under your leadership and under the guidance of the ministry, perhaps a number of the recommendations to which I've spoken about already and others which I have not specifically mentioned can be incorporated into additional recommendations for the development of broad policy guidelines that can help to develop vending as an industry in the third decade of the 21st century in a way that allows it to be genuinely developmental and ultimately to lend itself to the dignity of which we've all spoken over the past 2 weeks, Chairman. So that would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Colleagues, are there any other? Senator Wiggins, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make a very small point to something Ms. Nichols said in terms of filling out the forms online. I don't think that should be a problem, because filling out a form for an American visa is like the most difficult thing anybody can do online. And lots of people who want to apply for that visa find a mechanism to getting it done. So I don't think that we should put stumbling blocks in the way if we decided that these forms should be done electronically, because like I said, if you want a US visa, you get it done. You find somebody who can assist you and you get it done. So I think that in all of our business transactions, because we spoke to the whole question of technology usage and Wi-Fi and everything. So I think that all vendors should decide that they want to come on board when it comes to technology. And I think that this would be a very good way to begin. So I would advise not to let this be a stumbling block in terms of moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Minister Humphrey.
Thank you, sir. So in response to Senator Wiggins, it is true, many persons apply for the visa, but that a visa application now probably presents the worst example of the horrors of trying to use technology. The truth is, I suspect it is that difficult not because they want to let people in, and that I do not know that we should use that as the standard by which to gauge the markets, because the reality is it is a very challenging process for a visa. And I'm sure they have their reasons for making it so challenging. But I suspect, in terms of the substance of the discussion, it is not only about the technology. And I feel as if we've diverted there unnecessarily. I do not think it's only about the technology. I think the argument that the persons who are in the industry are making, those in agriculture, whether it's the minister or the manager or myself or my senior manager, and the representative from Barnufo, is this the best practice to go through commerce, more so than the technology itself? The technology is just a tool. So we're not questioning the tool necessarily, but is this the best approach in terms of handling the persons in the industry?
Am I mistaken, Minister? Or I seem to recall that you had just agreed that we would...
Yes, but we were still on the topic, so I'm saying I've agreed with it, and I'm still putting it on the table, sir. While I've agreed to allow us to pursue the matter. I just want to be very clear that it is not only about the technology.
Okay.
And while I would accept that we need to press on, because we all do need to press on, I do not want the records to be mistaken and reflect that we are proposing that is only a technology issue. It really is not.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other requests for the floor among the colleagues present?
I got one.
No?
On the sixth schedule, 64, I note the National Vending Committee, and I made a note here that there is no representative from the Fishing Association on this committee.
And that is agreed. I must tell you, ma'am, that it was an oversight. I think it had been drawn to our attention sometime earlier in our deliberations this week. So please do not let your heart be troubled about that. Barnufo, as with, I think there was one other, the Rastafari community, were supposed to be added to this list.
And I have one thing here again on the A schedule. What happened is that I had made a note of it, but since the document was printed, I'm not seeing everything that I had noted. But I want a little clarity on the wording. I don't know if it is the way it is or if there can be some clarity, but noting the thing here, manager of markets may let market stalls. I'm not seeing the full wording of what it was because it is printed over. At 25, A schedule, I'm looking at the number 2 under the Marketing Slaughterhouse Act, number 2.
Trying to find it. Bear with me.
A schedule.
Yes, yeah.
I am on page 69.
Page 69.
Sorry.
Yes.
Under Marketing Slaughterhouse Act,
Right.
number 2, which is manager of markets may let market stalls. I was reading that and I had a difficulty getting it put together. So I don't know if it's just the language of which the document speaks or if it is another way. But I'm not seeing the full thing because something's printed over it.
Chair? Chief
But
Parliament.
just like some clarity to the wording.
Understood. I'm going to ask the Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel, who is the drafter of the legislation, to speak to the matter, please. Deputy Chief, the floor is yours.
Yes, Chair. So the original wording would have spoken to the word let, and that's where it comes from. Where there's departure is in the Markets and Slaughterhouses Act. It didn't refer to the national vending legislation. So it was, so what you're seeing in the 8th schedule is what it will be once this legislation is passed. So in the original legislation, it says, subject to the provisions of these regulations, the chief supervisor may, on the payment of the appropriate rent as set out in the 1st schedule, let to any approved person in any market stall in any public market. The 8th, sorry, Chair, were you gonna?
No, and I was just going to, in the event that the challenge was with the term let, invite you to explain what that term let means there.
It would be to lease.
Right.
Or, right, yeah. So, and then what you see in the 8th schedule is what is proposed to replace it. Again, it used the word let because it is reflecting what was originally there. But I don't know if the suggestion then is perhaps to use other terminology rather than the word let.
I'm not sure that that's the suggestion. I thought that we were being invited to clarify what it meant. Ms. Nichols?
Yes, sir.
Um,
I wanted the clarity because what I had written down as a note was, can this language be made clearer?
Yes,
So,
okay. Yeah, when it says they're let to a person, it really means lease to a person. But for some reason, we lawyers tend to make language a lot more difficult than they need to be. But that's essentially what it is. That's the old English way of putting it.
thank you.
Yes. So in other words, you're going to lease to a person licensed as a vendor the stall, or lease the stall to a person licensed as a vendor, rather. Did you have any other matters that you wanted to raise with us, Ms. Nichols? Ms.
No,
Nichols? Sorry.
I'm sorry. No, I said I can't remember. There were some things in my head, but they're gone.
problem.
But I hope that during the time that we have for me to meet with the fisherfolk and I go back through this whole document with them, that given the opportunity to come back, I would have, if there is need to bring up anything else that I see in the document that needs any clarity or explanation, that I would be able to do so.
Well, ma'am, I gonna confess here and now that I want you to be able to have your meeting with your constituents. I think all of us who are in representative capacities understand the vital importance of that. That is the lifeblood of a democracy. I was hoping, because a lot of our time next week is going to be consumed by the technology which allows this place to function and the staff who support it, having to be all moved to the LESC, where we're going to have the election of the President of the Republic take place on Wednesday. And then, of course, everybody got to come back down and the technology got to be moved back down. So I don't think any business can realistically be done, as I'm made to understand, before Friday next week. Now, Friday next week is a date that has already been blocked by the leader of the opposition. He is chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, and I am chairman of this committee. But I'm going to talk to the leader of the opposition, my friend, and see whether he can be persuaded to accommodate us. He may not be minded to do that, but I have found that from time to time, speaking to the good bishop, you can appeal to his his better sensibilities. But we will see, ma'am. What I want to do, though, is to tell you that please treat to the matter of consultation with some dispatch. We will come back to you in one way, shape, or form, and we will be able to give you the opportunity to share with us your findings. Brother Lewis.
Yes, Chair.
Are there any other matters that you want to raise with us?
Yes. There's a culture in markets that we might have to use a little bit of discretion. I'm talking in terms of the management of markets. We allow fishermen to sell fish sometimes, and these fishermen would not have a seller's license, but they would have a fisherman's license. So I'm just advising the committee about that element. Sometimes a fisherman might bring a load of fish and he may not be able to get them sold at the price that he wants, and there has always been, facilities for the fisherman to sell his fish. Would that still be able to? Can we still have that practice without contravening the regulation? Or there are situations where fishermen might bring in jacks and may put a whole load of jacks on the back of a truck and go to the country selling. And they're not traditional vendors, they're fishermen, but they need to get the fish sold.
There's provision in the license for an occasional vendor's there's provision in the legislation for an occasional vendor's license to be obtained. If a fisherman consciously wants to put his jacks onto a vehicle and go through the country selling, I think he would be better advised to secure the occasional license. In circumstances, that's a different example to the one you gave first.
Right, yeah, I give you two.
Right. And the one that you gave first really is a little bit more taxing for me. I want to say, yes, we can accommodate, but I'm not sure how we can accommodate. And it may well have to be that the fishermen in those circumstances may have to enter into a private arrangement with a licensed vendor that they sell and they do some profit sharing. But I don't want to say that without having thought it through.
Yeah,
so I'm just sharing with you my initial reaction to it.
I understand, but it's not as simple as that. Vernell will tell you, if a fisherman comes in and the fish being sold at $2 a pound, for example, and he does not believe that it merits $2 a pound, that he wants $3 a pound, something we allow someone then to go to the front of the market, you know, and sell the fish.
No, but you see, this is the danger, though, Brother Lewis, of allowing too much informality to creep in.
But I said that was a cultural, kind of like a cultural norm.
I understand. I understand. So therefore, the fisherman in those circumstances benefits because he is able to sell alongside the vendor who had to have a license, but he ain't got no license. All he has is a permission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he might not be comfortable selling his fish to a vendor at $2 a pound, and then the vendor selling the fish at $4 a pound.
I agree with you.
He may prefer to go out and sell his fish at $4 a pound and get all his money for himself. And
then the flip side of that coin, of course, is that there may be some vendors who may be very unhappy that they have to pay a fee or a license, the money for a license in order to sell. And here's this fisherman who has not had to do that, and he could do the same thing I'm doing.
Who catch the fish?
Well, yeah.
I just say we mention that because I know that is a question that will come up sometime along the line.
You know, part of this, we can come to you now, Mr. Prescott. Part of this is that we're trying to bring order and structure. And it has not been an easy journey. But this is something else that we will have to turn our minds to. But I thank you for raising it. Minister Prescott wanted the floor. Sorry, Mr. Prescott wanted the floor.
Well, I'm just saying that it was referred to as this practice by fishermen was referred to as a norm, a cultural norm, and I didn't hear anyone say that as it stands now, it causes any conflict. I don't see why you have to regulate it and put it into law, and that as a consequence of doing that, it would create some conflict when we have already seen it being practiced for a considerable period of time, and it is accepted among the various agencies there, the retail sellers. It is done in agriculture. In agriculture, sometimes a man plants food, and he's the planter, but he also sells the food as though he's a retailer in the circumstances, and it doesn't cause any problem. It is part of a cultural practice, and obviously sanctioned by the society itself already. I don't think we need to put something like that into law. I'm just saying so.
I think you don't want some overzealous policeman to stop a truckload of jacks in the country and ask the men to go have any license. So because I know that question will be asked.
And I want to say to you that my profession tells me that we can't do a formal thing in an informal way. And that is perhaps how we find ourselves in these difficulties. I take what Mr. Prescott has said, but the truth of the matter is that long after I am gone and he is gone, there will be a reason for somebody to say, why am I asked to pay a fee in order to sell, or why is this person allowed to sell alongside me but he is not paying a fee? And these difficulties we will find ourselves confronting and would have no proper answer. Law is about certainty and the consistent application of that certainty. So it is an issue that we have to look at, and I want to thank you for raising it for us. Now, equally, I want to thank all three of you for coming and sharing with us your thoughts. I think it has been a valuable exchange. I know, Ms. Nichols, that you probably are going to have to spend a little bit more time with us, but Ms. Holder and Mr. Lewis, I am indebted to you. We have colleagues waiting on the outside, representatives of the Association of Vendors, Wayside Vendors, and I am going to therefore thank you, Mr. Lewis, thank you, Ms. Holder, and you also, Ms. Nichols, for the time you've spent with us and the assistance you've given to this committee. We are grateful to you. And I would ask you now to vacate the room that you're now in. We will take a short adjournment for 5 minutes, no more, suspension for 5 minutes, no more, so that we can then pay attention to the necessary COVID-19 directives and have the others come in, and then we continue. So once again, thank you very much, folks. May I have a motion for suspension for 5 minutes, please?
I beg to so move.
Thank you.
Very second.
Thank you, Minister Cummins and Minister Ford. We stand suspended.